Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Government House, excuse me, to the Winter Conversations series. As we start, could I please ask that you make sure your mobile phones are turned to silent. The session is being live streamed on Facebook and will be available later on the Governor's website, and there will be ample time to ask questions, so please do think of some while you're listening. Today, in contributing to the public discourse on issues that help create strong and healthy communities, Her Excellency and the guests will be exploring the topic of environmental leadership. Her Excellency is joined by Mr Tim Jarvis, AM 2024 Australian of the Year for South Australia, and Ms Tiani Adamson, 2024 Young Australian of the Year for South Australia. Tim is committed to finding pragmatic solutions to major environmental issues related to climate change and biodiversity loss. He uses his expeditions, films, books and public speaking engagements to promote thinking in these areas. Known for his historically authentic recreations of the Antarctic survival journeys of Sir Douglas Mawson and Sir Ernest Shackleton, he is a founder of the Fork Tree Project, a native revegetation project on the Fleurieu Peninsula. He is a global ambassador and governor of the environmental NGO WWF and a vice president of Flora and Fauna International. Tiani Adamson is an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander woman descended from the Kareg Nations. She is a wildlife conservation biologist and lead community engagement officer at climate change solutions companies CH4 Global, which leverages red seaweed to help with methane reduction. In this role, she finds ways to walk alongside traditional owners while healing country. She has also worked with the CSIRO on Indigenous education programs, trained under Al Gore as a climate reality leader, and was a youth dialogue member for the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Your Excellency.
Okay. Thank you, Hugh. Gana bogana aile, gana mina aile, yaichi mina aile kumatana yatananku. Nyatuna tampandi, gana mina, yaichi yata matina, bukaninanku, yalaka, takaricha. Dear Ghana elders, Ghana people, Aboriginal people from other lands and regions, I acknowledge and pay my respects to you all. And I also acknowledge that the land we're meeting on today is Ghana country, as it has been from the past, is today, and will be in future. Now, welcome everybody. This is our third and final Winter Conversation series, so we're expecting full summer from, well, maybe not summer, but warm enough to be able to enjoy a picnic on the lawns from the first Friday of next month. I'm so pleased that you could join us today, and I'm particularly pleased that we've got a number of school students with us. Rod and I have a program of visiting schools across the state, and we went back to those we visited so far this year, and I think 13 schools have sent students. A particular shout out to those who've come from Lucindale Area School. That, to me, says a very big commitment about our subject today, environmental leadership. And as it happens, not unsurprisingly perhaps, environmental leadership broadly and all of the things that that encompasses is the number one issue raised with Rod and with me when we visit schools across the state. So for that reason, when we get to Q&A, and my job as moderator is to make sure that we've got a big chunk of time, I'm aiming for half an hour for Q&A, I am going to turn first to students, and I will preference students. I want everybody to know that in the Q&A session. So please do think of questions that you might want to ask. And if I can encourage you not to be nervous about it, don't worry about those sitting behind you. Just think of yourself in a conversation with our two wonderful guests today. And I want to thank Tim and Tiani most warmly for joining us. They're very busy in their role as Australians of the Year for South Australia. That year will shortly be coming to an end, and if anything, their engagement is sort of reaching fever pitch. They were both on stage together last night, somewhere else, but they're both, from my experience, real optimists. And when we think about environmental leadership, there is much that would make us feel a bit downcast, but these two, I hope in the course of today, are going to give you cause for hope and some practical things that you might already be doing, but more that you could do. So I'm actually going to start by asking both of them, and I'll start with you, Tiani, if I can. What was it that really developed your passion for environmental conservation. How did you, I think of you both as environmental scientists, how did all of that start?
I think as a young person, I was always really ingrained in the environment, and thank you so much for having me here and giving me the opportunity to share space with you all. I grew up in a different way of life. I lived on a place called Palm Island, which is one of the largest Aboriginal communities in Australia. It's off the coast of Townsville, and it's a beautiful natural system where food comes on a barge or a boat across to the island and delivers materials maybe once a week. If it's bad weather, the barge doesn't come. So with that sort of lifestyle, you have to learn how to live sustainably off the land to be able to survive. So you need to be able to hunt and fish, and you need to understand the environment and look after it. And fresh water systems were really critical to be able to have fresh water and to look after the country that you're on. So I grew up knowing that we had to manage and look after country sustainably for our survival of our community. And that was a really integral part of living in a way that I just grew up. We also managed country as First Nations people as the normality of what we do. It's the same as like brushing your teeth in the morning. So we'd be walking to school and we'd be picking up rubbish. We'd be doing burns for burning country to regenerate plants. We'd be looking and testing the water to make sure that the sea animals were happy and that we had lots of fish. So that was just how I was grown up, in that sort of ingrained way of being, knowing and doing. And then when I moved down to Adelaide for university when I was 17, I realised that the Western education system didn't include our knowledges very well, that it didn't include First Nations custodianship and stewardship of country, and that it was a different knowledge system. So I kind of had this realisation of how can we do that better to bring these two knowledge systems together, because there's strength in both, in having First Nations knowledge and traditional knowledge, which is at least 65,000 years old, and in knowing environmental science from a Western lens with the testing and validity of the things that we've done in the Western science space. So that kind of ingrained that passion in me to bridge the gap in the knowledge systems, but also for me to understand the environment in a better way. We know that we're in a climate crisis. As a First Nations person, our First Nations communities are the ones who are affected the most by climate change and contribute the least. They're on the front lines of climate change, still often living off the land, and our communities up on islands are sometimes about a metre above sea level. So they're in really vulnerable positions and situations. Will be our first climate refugees. We know that the data says that we're going to have more climate refugees than we've had refugees from war in the future. So it's a pretty crazy statistic, and these sorts of numbers and figures drive me to make positive change and keep doing this sort of work to uplift our communities and to make this earth a more sustainable, better place for all of the future generations that we have to come.
That's pretty compelling, isn't it? I think we'd have to say. Now, Tim, the same question to you, if I may.
Hard act to follow. Thank you very much, Gianni. Look, I'm still very young, right? Very much like you guys. No, look, I began life in Malaysia, actually. I grew up in Malaysia as a kid. My father used to distribute tiger balm, can you believe, around the world. That was his job. And sitting in the back of the car, I remember traveling through endless oil palm plantations and rubber plantations just to go on a family trip and saying to my parents as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, where's the room for nature in all this? I just didn't see it. And I think the explanations I was given back then were, look, there's plenty of other space for nature. But as I've matured, of course, I've realised that's not really the case. I've always worn two hats. I'm an environmental scientist by training, so I guess I get to, learn all the statistics around the state of how the planet is currently, and sometimes that keeps you awake at night. Other times you feel optimistic. Other times you feel pragmatically optimistic, which is you accept there's a problem, but you also understand that if we all pull together and use our intellect and our enthusiasm, and we're diligent, we can actually solve those problems. So it's my science background. And then wearing my exploration hat, I guess I've gone to some of the remotest places in the world. And if you see the human footprint in places as remote as the deepest parts of Antarctica, then you know that if it's there, it is probably everywhere. And so that really instills a sense of urgency in needing to act. And then you come to the realization, or I've come to the realization over several decades, that the expeditions one does and the images you bring back of the fragility and beauty of those places, plus the lessons about how you pull those expeditions together, leadership and problem solving and managing change and motivating people, those same skills can be used to actually try and affect change in being part of the solution to the environmental problems. So you find yourself basically immersed in this world where you think, I've got an opportunity here, I really can't afford to not use it. So even if I felt like doing nothing, I feel really obliged to act.
We'll come back to exploration in a minute, if I may. But Tiani, I'd like to come back to you, including because we've got some students in the audience, and you spoke very emphatically, I think, actually, about the contribution that Indigenous knowledge can make, acquired over 65,000 years of survival, the two systems coming together. It seems to me that you've been a leader from a very young age, and you're still very young. But for the younger people in the audience, I wanted to ask you how comfortable you feel about that, and why do you feel it's important for young people to step up to be leaders in the environmental space?
Leadership is an interesting term. I think as a young person we get really uncomfortable with being called a leader because we are wanting to stay humble in our identity and kind of blend in. We have this thing in Australia that's really strong called tall poppy syndrome, where you're kind of afraid of reaching your highest height and growing tall, to be afraid that you're outside of the social norm or the social group, for fear that you'll be cut down, that people will maybe think that you are big-headed or that you're full of yourself or trying too hard. So I think it's an interesting lens that we have around leadership. But leadership is the pinnacle aspect of what we require in society to thrive, to be able to model excellence and be able to have excellent examples of ways that we can positively affect change. So I think I'm getting used to the term leadership a lot better now. I'm 30 in about 6 months. So I think it's kind of coming to terms with me a bit more about how excellent leadership is as a role, and that you can identify, myself working in communities and with young people a lot, you can identify elements of leadership in everyone from a really young age, and people have these elements of leadership that they can lean into. And doing this sort of work now, I can see that there are many different types of leadership that are required to have a thriving society. And that doesn't mean that the best leader is the loudest or most bold and confident person. Some of the best leaders are the quiet people who are a little bit more calculated and have a different sense, maybe a little bit more empathetic towards people. And good leadership takes diversity and equity and people from all different backgrounds, whether it's cultural diversity or neurodivergency and gender diversity, and all of these balances of people coming together to have the best leadership to adequately represent our society. So I think as a young person, own leadership in yourself. You have elements of leadership in you. Work out what your strengths are and lean into those, and work out ways that you can be a leader within the things that you love and know and do. We talk about, strengthening our weaknesses, but I think definitely continue to strengthen your strengths and know where you sit within that leadership aspect and be proud of it. It's such an important thing to be able to nurture other people, to help grow our society, to help look after the climate and make safer, better, more equitable communities. So leadership is a really valuable thing, and I'm starting to get comfortable with it now, and I urge all other young people to do that too. The government and Her Excellency are really excited about bringing youth voices into decision making now, and that's something that's quite new. Previously, youth voices were quite quiet, and in my culture, we generally listen to our elders for knowledge, which is still really important. We absolutely need to listen to the wisdom of our elders, but having that youth perspective is really important to represent our society more adequately, because you're inheriting the future that we have, and what you know and want for the future is really important too.
Thanks, Tiani. And one of my 6 priorities as Governor really is to encourage leadership in all things and at all ages and stages across the state. And it's incredibly heartening for me to see it so evident in so many places across the state, but encouraging young people to think about it and to take it on obviously has potentially benefits over lifetimes and particular benefits for South Australia's future, I think. Tim, I said we'd come back to exploration, and many people here, but possibly not everybody, will know that you're perhaps best known for having undertaken some extraordinary feats. You talked about footsteps before, but let's talk about footsteps in a different way, because not only did you retrace the journeys of Antarctic explorers Sir Douglas Mawson and Sir Ernest Shackleton, but you did it using the resources, the same resources that those men had 100 years ago, the same boats, navigational equipment, clothing, and even food rations. Some might be asking the question, why? I'd quite like to ask the question, why? Why also risk your life in this way? And what did those experiences, and you touched on it a little bit when you first spoke, but what did that teach you about leadership and environmental leadership in particular? That's 4 questions in one, but why?
Yeah.
Why did you risk, etc.?
Look, I'm only 26, so look what it's done to me. The pressures of the Antarctic expeditions. Look, I think, in all honesty, I might well forget some of these questions as I start trying to answer them. Quite a familiar narrative in the world today is that everything's been discovered. What's left to go and explore? And in fact, there's so much we haven't discovered. We don't really know much about the oceans and the floor of the oceans. We don't know what dark matter is. We don't know what dark energy is. If you ask any 2 ecologists how many species we've got on the planet, you'll get a massive range from sort of 20 million to 100 million. So there's plenty of things we haven't discovered yet. But I really think exploration is about finding out what lies within yourself as much as it's that literal journey of exploration. So that's sort of why I continue to do it. And look, I've done many expeditions over the years, and there was this nagging feeling I had that how would what I was able to achieve in the modern era, GPS and Gore-Tex jackets and plastic boots and cheating and Mars bars and things like that, how would I compare against those legends from the old days? And could it be done? Could someone in the modern era attempt to do things the way that people like Sir Douglas Mawson and Ernest Shackleton did? And so that's what sort of got me started. The other thing was that Alexandra Shackleton, who's a very powerful woman, and Sir Ernest Shackleton's granddaughter, said, "Will you do this?" And she meant, "You will do this." It was a rhetorical question, and so I had no choice but to do it. And off I went. And look, it was an amazing experience. I do the expeditions, trying to answer some of your questions, Your Excellency. I do the expeditions partly because of that personal journey of exploration, and because I think humans need to do that. We need to push our boundaries and see what we're capable of doing. And going back to Tiani's point, this is all about each of us stepping forward and deciding that if there's a problem, we're going to be the ones who try and fix it, and having the confidence to have your voice be heard, and that kind of thing. So I go on the expeditions because of that side of things, but I also go because I think the opportunity that the films and the books and the speaking about adventures give you allow you to really move the dial on the environment side of things. And I really believe very firmly there are so many lessons you can take from expeditions that you can apply to the environmental crises we're faced with today. Expeditions are about starting with the end point in mind. What do you need to have in place to achieve a goal? Getting in Shackleton's little boat and sailing across the ocean and climbing the mountains in old gear and suffering and all that kind of thing. You always work with the end point in mind and put in place what you think will be required to get the job done. It's the same with climate. We know what the target is we want to reach. What do we need to put in place to achieve it? You break down the total journey into small pieces. You celebrate success along the way, and you don't worry about things you can't control on an expedition. How many of us feel paralyzed by the enormity of issues like climate change and the loss of biodiversity on the planet? So much so that we think either our contribution to the problem or the solution's too small, therefore why should we bother? We'll just pretend it doesn't exist and just go about our daily lives. Each one of us should take confidence in the fact that if all of us did a small bit and just focused on what we could control, ultimately, collectively, we will get there. So there's so many things I think you can take from this expedition experience that really keeps me going and gives me a kind of compass as to where I'm heading when I deal with environmental issues, that I do it almost as much for that as I do for that personal journey of exploration. And I'm not going to go back and do Shackleton's journey again. It was too miserable and tough. So.
Well, it's the basis of a Harvard leadership, of a Harvard course on leadership, actually, which I had the pleasure of doing. That Shackleton journey really teaches, there's a
Nancy
lot,
Kahn, I think it was
yeah,
Nancy,
a lot
yeah.
to be
Yeah.
taught about leadership.
Yes.
Tiani, back to you. And look, these conversations are designed partly to cover ground that might not be covered elsewhere, but they're also an opportunity for us to go back and just check our understanding on some things that have become, if you like, everyday concepts in a way. And I know you wouldn't claim to speak for all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, Tiani, but you have already mentioned the importance of country, and I wondered if you could just, again, particularly for the young people in the room, just talk to us about what you mean when you talk about country, and also how those concepts of country and the knowledge and wisdom that are inherent in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's relationship with it, how that's important to addressing climate change.
Absolutely. And something important, I guess, to explain, our understanding of country is very different to saying Australia or the Americas and China and so on. Our understanding of country is a really holistic ecosystem approach. So when we think about country as First Nations people, or for myself and my family anyway, it's about the environment, so the land and the soil and everything beneath the earth that exists in the terrestrial or the land-based system. It's about all of the water that flows on the country, so salt water and fresh water and all of those estuary systems where they meet in between. It's the plants and animals and all of them that exist here. Traditionally, it was only animals that were endemic or native to the area, and now we've got an interesting number of lots of livestock and things that didn't originally belong here that inhabit our land, but it includes all of those now. It's about the wind and the smoke that cleanses the land, and it's about the people that are on the country too. So all of the relationships that we have with one another, the cultural diversity that we have. So in First Nations Australia, we have over 600 dialects of language and about 300 clans or different groups of First Nations people with completely different languages and law, and LORE for law, and ways of being, knowing and doing. So massive cultural diversity here before we had colonised Australia. So all of those relationships with that. And the other part of country is the spiritual relationship that we have to the land and to one another and to ourselves. And an element of that connection is about deep listening to ourselves and to the environment and living in harmony with that. So when you think about that idea of country, you can see that you can't not look after the environment if you view country in that way, because it's the survivability and the connectedness and the relationship of everything that's alive. So you can't destroy it or not think about it in the way that you act as a human being. It needs to be at the forefront of your mind, because that relationship that we have, or that understanding of country, means that we know that if anything is not thriving, that everything is becoming sick from that. And I think of this like a tree. So if we put ourselves as the trunk of the tree, as you as a human, you're the trunk, and underneath you are all these roots like a tree. And that root system comes with land and water, plants and animals, relationships with other people and family, and all of these different roots, a sense of purpose, maybe your career, your friendships and your family, your sense of spirituality and language holding you up. If one of these starts to die or deteriorate, if the others are really strong, we can keep growing the tree healthily. But if a bunch of these are getting sick and the roots are shortening and dying, the tree will die too. So I think about that in my relationship with country and the relationship that I have with myself. And so I guess as a side note about mental well-being in the climate crisis, our idea of being able to strengthen these roots to country and nature and community and things that give us a sense of purpose to hold ourselves strong to be able to make change in the future. So it's a really nice way of looking at things, and I think that it's a really important thing that we look forward to now that sense of culture and connection and way of viewing that is a really beautiful part of First Nations culture. So I'm really grateful to be able to share it with you.
Thank you, Tiani. Tim, I'm conscious we've only got about 3 minutes before we hand the half an hour to the audience and give Hugh a bit of time at the end. But you mentioned the Fork Tree Project, and I just wondered if you could speak about it really briefly, because I imagine even just a brief knowledge about it may well elicit some more questions.
Has anybody been? No. I just wondered whether
people in the front row.
some of the... Well, good. Nice to see you. I was going to say if there were some of the younger people here who've been and have me cracking the whip saying, come on, we've got to get more trees in the ground, I'm worried that they're going to take the opportunity in the Q&A session to ask me some really tricky questions. Look, it started off as a rewilding project. In other words, taking the land back from being a farm to what the First Nations person might have recognised as being natural a couple of hundred years ago. So trying to return it to nature. That's the main goal of what we're trying to do. We're trying to show all the techniques you can use to return a farm back to nature. We need that not only for supporting the plants and animals that would have called that kind of place home and building habitat, but we also need restoration of landscapes for taking all the excess carbon dioxide that humans have put up there out of the atmosphere, because currently the ocean's doing most of that work. If we want to help the ocean and stop the ocean becoming more acidic, we need to be planting back habitat, because habitat and plants and soils are the best way to take carbon dioxide down. So there's that. We then have an agreement with the Botanic Garden here in South Australia to grow some of the rarest plants in the state in what we call a rare seed orchard. And they're growing in the ground under irrigation, and then we harvest the seed from those plants, take them to our nursery, and we grow each one in an individual pot with the help of a lot of schools, actually, so come down. And those are used to rehabilitate and rebuild the landscape, both at Fork Tree and a whole series of other places in the hills and Fluria. And the third element is that we run a sustainability-based education program. And I'll be honest, we didn't realise the number of schools who would want to come until the first one came, and the second one came, and the third one, and the fourth one, and now we have about 2 a week during term time. A lot of people coming with some of the issues that you guys might feel very acutely, like real anxiety around climate and biodiversity. What can we do to make a difference? And I like to hope that the act of planting a tree gives people a real sense of achievement and a real sense of peace you get out of actually being part of the solution rather than just worrying about the problem.
Thanks, Tim. Tiani, CH4 Global. Again, some members of the audience will know about it. Can you just give us a really quick burst on that? Because it's pretty fundamental to what you're doing.
Absolutely. So I work for a company called CH4 Global, and CH4 is methane, CO2 is carbon dioxide, 2 of the major greenhouse gases that are warming our world really quickly. Methane is 88 times hotter, more heating potential than carbon dioxide, but it lives in the atmosphere for about 20 years, so it's much shorter lived. We grow a seaweed called Asparagopsis. It's native to Australia and Aotearoa here in South Australia, and we produce it down into a cattle feed and feed it to livestock. 1/3 of global methane emissions come from cow burps and farts, mostly burps, so there's a fun fact for you just before you have your lunch. And this is a massive issue for our climate. So obviously we've produced all of these animals, it's warming our earth really quickly, and we feed the cattle the seaweed supplement and it reduces their methane output by up to 90%. So it's a very, very exciting solution, but we need all of these different parts of climate drawing down carbon dioxide, working with new materials for plastics, renewable energy, all of these parts coming together to have a really good climate in the future. So I'm really excited to see all of these bits into play, greening our places and bringing nature back into cities and all those things in between.
Thank you both very much. Well, we're now going to turn over to you. Can I ask, if you'd like to ask a question, put your hand up. If we get lots of questions, lots of people wanting to do it, and I'm going to start with this young man in the front row. If we get lots of people wanting to ask questions, I might group them. But when you ask a question, could you stand if you're comfortable standing? But if you're not, don't worry. Could you say who you are and if you're coming from a school, which school you're from? If you're from an organisation, let us know what that is. Then ask your question. Ideally, as briefly as possible, not encouraging statements here, just questions. Okay, let's start with the young man in the front row, if he's comfortable asking a question there.
So Nick is from Our Lady of Lavang Special School. What's your question, Nick?
I'm asking for, well, I'm actually saying I want to know about Tiny, and I'm wondering if I can I stop things from happening to things like global warming. What things I can do?
What things you can do for global warming? Yeah,
Stop global warming,
to stop global
Tiani.
warming. Yeah, beautiful question. So lots of things that you can do as an individual, and thanks so much for asking. There are incredible powers in the individual taking action on climate change, and a part of that when you start to earn money and those sorts of things is making sure that your banking and your super is not related to a company that is involved in fossil fuels. A really great thing that you can do at home right now is managing your waste. So recycling and landfill and green waste, you can separate them out. When we put our green waste or our food in the landfill bin, it increases methane emissions and produces a lot of methane. So that's a really cool one that you can do at home. Planting trees and getting involved in greening projects, so you can go and hang out with Tim and plant some trees to bring down more of that carbon. We can also look at different ways of powering our places with renewables. Waste management and those sorts of practical things. What else are you thinking, Tim?
Oh, I mean, they're very good ones. I mean, I think, the second biggest user of electricity in our house is standby. So put things off standby after your fridge. Fridge is number one, followed by standby. And 40% of Australia's carbon footprint comes from the energy to heat, light and cool our buildings. So we've all got control over that one. Think about how much meat we eat. If you're not feeding livestock, and this isn't anti the pastoral industry, but if you're not using Tiani's methane-reducing food supplements, then if we all think about how much meat we eat, do we need meat for, every evening meal of the week? If we can think about that, because 50% of the habitable land on the planet, half, is for farming. And 3/4 of that half are for the animals we eat. Pigs, goats, cows, sheep, chickens. If we all ate a little bit less meat, we might actually reduce the amount of land that's given over to agriculture and reduce the carbon emissions and methane emissions from that and allow nature to recover a bit and do some of the work for us. So I think thinking about how we eat, electricity at home, speak to your mum and dad, see them doing the wrong thing, say, hey. So there's lots of things we can do.
Thanks very much for that first question. It's always good when someone's brave enough to ask the first question. Now, we've got other questions first from school students, if I may. All right, we've got 3 hands from school students up, and what I'm going to do is ask each of you to ask a question. So starting in the middle there, and then over to my right, your left, and then the front row.
I'm Olivia, I'm from Marrickville High School, and I guess I kind of want to know how to bridge the gap between students and the environment to give them more compassion.
Okay, first question. Thanks, Olivia. How to bridge the gap. Second one.
Hi, I'm Evelyn Sheffers and I come from Trinity College. Coming from someone who has agricultural backgrounds, I'm wondering if, because we see lots of conservation in plant species, mammal species, what is the conservation like for insect species, and how can we better use insecticides and pesticides to make sure that we don't sort of cause extinction of vital species?
Thank you for that question, Evelyn. And then the third one in the front row.
Hello, I'm Rose from St Mary's College, and I would love to know what your ideas are on, because we're a college in the city, and a lot of our buildings are just stone and cement, and we don't have a lot of green life around. I would love to see your ideas on how to make our school greener and how to make our students more environmentally friendly. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rose. So that's bridging the gap, insects, city environment. What can you do about it? What can they do at St Mary's, which I've had the pleasure of visiting, of course. Tim, maybe we'll start with you.
Multiple questions again, so they're very good questions, can I say. Look, the one thing I've learned from expeditions, going back to that one, is that if you want to, leadership is about getting a group of people with different start points and different expectations and hopes and skills to pull in the same direction to achieve a singular thing. That's really what leadership is. And everybody's different, so you've got to find the thing that you think works for the person whose behaviour you're trying to change to get them to become involved. So if you're trying to get students involved, you've got to find something that you think is going to work to get them interested. With my reforestation program, I have a farmer next door who is a sheep farmer, and he's not really that interested in the environment, but he is interested in the health of his sheep. So I make sure whenever I try and talk about putting in plants, native plants, and wind belts and shelter belts, I use the kind of language that he likes to use. And I talk in terms of the benefits it will have for him and his sheep. Even though I'm motivated by wanting to save the planet for the native plants and animals, I've got to really try and put things to him in language that I think will work for him. You know, it reduces the number of lambs that die in the winter because you slow the wind speed down, makes the grass last longer, which gives the animals more to eat. So you've got to find things that I think work for the people you're trying to engage, whether they're young people or not. In terms of the school piece, very briefly, I think with climate change, we can turn the tap off tomorrow, so everybody drives electric cars and has solar on their roof and things like that. We live in the greenest state in Australia, so that's great. That's all about not adding to the problem. But I think the big thing is with carbon dioxide, it lasts about 200 years in the atmosphere, so we need to take it down, as I've said. And I think what we really need to do is get schools to be growing plants and doing it in a coordinated way so that each school can have their particular species they grow that will allow us collectively to build back the habitat we would like to see, whether it's on your school footprint or more broadly, because we just don't have enough people doing that. And we have 58 million hectares of spare land in Australia without kicking people off their farms or putting trees on footy ovals or anything like that, where we could actually put back habitat. And I think schools would be a wonderful, wonderful resource to use to help that happen.
Thank you, Tim. Now, Tiana, you're going to have something to say about insects.
I am.
You looked enthusiastic, so let me...
I love insects. They're so important. And I remember when I was younger, after living on Palm Island, we moved to Coffin Bay, which is on the Eyre Peninsula. And we used to drive between Coffin Bay and Adelaide, and our windscreen would get covered in bugs. I drove back about 3 weeks ago from the Eyre Peninsula after planting some trees, and the number of bugs on my windscreen are far less, which is incredibly concerning. And this conversation around insects and bugs and these species so many species are becoming extinct and their numbers reducing massively is really worrying, because they underpin the food source or the food web for a lot of other animals. A really cool thing that you can do to be able to bring them back is plant native flowers and different types of native herbs, perennial herbs, that can increase their numbers. So Green Adelaide is giving out these seeds for free, and I think Adelaide City Council give out some seeds for free as well, and they teach you how to grow them and where to put them, which is a really fantastic way of doing that. We need to bring these species back, and the fact that our windscreens are requiring less washing is actually really concerning for our environment. So a great question there. But you can plant these in really small areas, like around the school or around home, and they have a massive positive impact. Warming is something that is affecting them, so the warming of our environment. So if we keep planting more trees and having that drawdown, using renewable energy and stop using fossil fuels, that will help too. In terms of the compassion question, I feel like the storytelling element that Tim was speaking about, finding ways that we can connect and relate to people to have an element of compassion and empathy, but finding a way to communicate a level of understanding where we can bring people on the journey. Climate affects everyone, and everyone has some sort of tie to it in a different way. So a really important thing to try and work out how we can communicate that. I think the arts and music is a really fantastic way of doing that. Not everyone is into science, although I think science underpins everything that exists. So finding out those different ways of having that emotional response in that way. And then down to the question at the front, we're doing some really cool greening walls and urban greening. So being able to plant species that climb along the walls and adding in that natural aspect, which increases our mental well-being as well. Human beings thrive from seeing things that are living and that are green. And so you can chat with your school about ways that you can cover those stones in being able to grow with greenery. Or even if you bring in a garden that comes inside, that kind of has a water catchment place. They're really cheap to set up as well. Green Adelaide can help you do that too. They've got an awesome nature education team.
Well, thank you. Tim, you want to come back?
I forgot the insect question. You know, I don't call what I do a reforestation project because it's not just about trees. It's about putting back grasses and flowers and ground cover species, because they're the things that bring the insects back. That's what you really want first of all. Once the insects are back, you get the birds and the amphibians and the reptiles and everything else in order. You tend not to start from the trees and work down. You tend to start with the grasses and the things that will attract the insects as the pollinators first of all. So they're the key thing to get back.
And I should add, we're working on our own modest rewilding project here at Government House. Typically, government houses around the country are full of exotic plants that come from faraway places. And we've got a nice area out the back that we're trying to, over time, it will take us time, take back to something approximating what First Nations people would have been familiar with thousands of years ago. And we too are looking for insects and reptiles and of a small kind, not a dangerous kind.
Talk.
We can talk. All right, we should talk. Now, I'm going to open up for more questions, but I am inclined, I think, to take 2 or 3 at a time. So the woman in the second row and then the gentleman here on the aisle to start with. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Linda Bear. I'm a retired teacher, but I've recently heard that there's a move afoot to cull kangaroos in our national parks. Now, I'm personally horrified at that, but it does occur to me, Tim, that you might be doing all this wonderful planting and you'll get a flock of kangaroos, especially at the moment, they'll be looking for water and that sort of thing. Would you kill them? What will you do?
We're going to, well, not immediately, we're going to go to the second question. So Linda and kangaroo culling, and in the second row here.
Oh, hello, Andrew Winkler from Friends of Parks and Nature. My question is, as scientists, what do you think of the leadership potential in scientific research and communication at the South Australian Museum, given the proposed changes? Thanks.
Love these adult questions. And by the way, for the school students, your time is not yet over if you've still got questions. All right. Now, you don't have to buy into every question, each one of them, but as long as someone's prepared to have a go at answering each one.
Well, I might diplomatically sidestep the South Australian Museum questions, that's all right. But
kangaroo culling.
But the kangaroo culling, thanks, Linda, for that tricky one. I mean, look, I think... I had one of my neighbours came up to me at Forktree, and they have this sheep operation with 8 stock dams, all of which have involved drilling down into the groundwater to provide them with a plentiful year-round supply of water. As a result, they have thousands of kangaroos because we've also got rid of dingoes. I think the last one in the Adelaide Hills was 1900-something, so there's nothing to predate on kangaroos. We've disrupted Indigenous culture to the extent that there's no consumption really of kangaroos by First Nations people in the Fleurieu Peninsula. So basically nothing is getting in the way of kangaroo numbers getting extremely high. So they've got plentiful supply of water, no predators, which then presents a problem for someone like me who likes them when someone who runs cows and sheep, not beating up on that industry, but come to me and say, oh, isn't it a shame that you've put fences up to keep the kangaroos out? I thought you were all about restoring nature, to which point I say, well, if you hadn't done what you did, I probably wouldn't have to put fences up to stop them eating my trees, because that's what they will do, until we get the habitat established well enough to allow them back in. So to answer your question in a very roundabout way, we keep them out. We don't shoot them, but we do shoe them. And we've got 1.8 metre high fencing. I put out a social media thing, because that's the kind of guy I am. I'm very youthful and, into my social media. And I said, it's a roo shoe. And most people misread that and thought it was a roo shoot. And there was a lot of consternation, but we try and scare them out. But it's like herding cats sometimes. So we do keep them out just to allow the trees to get to the point where we can. Very difficult. It's very difficult. You'd have to have exclusion fencing around everywhere. Having been on the board of the zoo where we were working, not me personally, but the zoo worked to restore the yellow-footed rock wallaby, you can take a joey from a yellow-footed rock wallaby mother, give it to another surrogate, and that yellow-footed rock wallaby mother will fall pregnant almost immediately again, and you can have 6 joeys appear in a year. So numbers can escalate very, very quickly. So look, I think we need to start redressing the ecological balance in places like the Fleurieu rather than put it upon people like me to make a decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Tricky
question.
No
tricky
easy
question.
answers, which is why you asked the question, I'm sure. Now, Tiani, have you got anything to say about?
Yeah, in terms of the kangaroo populations, I've done lots of work over all different parts of Australia, and not all of the kangaroos here in Australia have enough resources to be healthy. A lot of them are starving and are lacking lots of nutrients and resources, and I've got some really horrific pictures through the desert where they haven't had enough access to resources and food, and they're really unwell and really sick, to the point as well that we can't eat them because they're so riddled with disease and they're so unhealthy. So it's a tricky thing because they are overpopulated in a lot of areas because we have ruined the system, the ecosystem that they depend on. We've gotten rid of their predators, we've taken their food and given it to livestock. So it's a tricky balance because no animal should be living in that way in harm. They're completely like bags of bones with a long tail. It's really devastating to see. So the culling in that sense is really important to make sure that they're not living in harm. I would love to see us utilise our landscape in the way that it was intended better. We took over all the things that we loved from a different country and put them here and tried to set up another version of the UK, which I'm glad that Tim's here, so that's nice. However, bringing across all of the plants and animals that people liked from back home and trying to set up another version of England is a really strange thing to do when all of these plants and animals have really bad implications. If we changed the way that we live and lived more off of native animals, we could live off of kangaroo and look after them in a different way. Kangaroo fences don't work overly well. They're really clever animals. They can jump really high and they're really intelligent, so they're really hard to block out. So that's why there's some culling processes to try and keep their numbers in order, but it's a tricky thing to do. In relation to the museum question, I think to keep things quite bipartisan-y balanced, I believe that research is really important. I believe that the museum has a lot of incredible researchers and incredible archives and amounts of data that are really useful to South Australia and to understanding our systems better. I hope that the research continues and that it's something that is always looked into as being of benefit, otherwise it's a bit of a waste. But to keep it kind of in that area of not getting caught in the weeds, I think that the South Australian Museum is an incredible resource with great people, and I hope that that work continues to be able to create great meaningful change for South Australia and wider Australia as well. It's an important place that we have that I love very much.
Questions from up the back, perhaps? Perhaps I haven't been looking hard enough. All right, there's one hand that's gone up. Any others? There are 2 hands that have gone up towards the back there. Any others? 3. Well, let's take those 3 hands right at the back, 2 on my right and 1 on my left.
Hi, I'm Lotta from St John's Grammar School.
I was just wondering if you had any suggestions for any small environmental initiatives that school communities could take on board.
Thank you, Lotta.
Hi, Tracy McNamara, CEO of the Foundation for Australia's Most Endangered. I've got a question a little bit different. In regards to environmental leadership, I know there's a lot of pressure on government to be doing a lot of the changes, but I'm interested in your view as to, we work a lot with private-public partnerships and the importance of that nationally and globally, and do you think that's probably more the way forward rather than the 100% on government?
Thank you, Tracy. So that's a question on PPPs. Lotta was on school initiatives.
Sharon Colsey, a concerned citizen. You mentioned trying to rewild the land. I'm curious how, as humans, we help nature to become nature again.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to, at risk of overtaxing our panel, but I'm taking notes. The woman up the back there. Yes, you. Thank you.
My name's Anne Manfield. I'm actually here representing Carrick-Hill House Museum, and you might wonder why I'm here. We do have our own conservation program because the house is on 100 acres, much of which is bushland. But I just go to Tiani's comment about humans and their need for art and music, and I just wonder in relation to bringing that back to the environment, what your thoughts are.
Well, that's a really interesting mix of questions. Now, panel, who would like to go first?
I'm so glad you took 4. Thank you.
Actually, Sharon, can you just remind me again? I can't read my writing. Sharon, what was your question again? My
question was
concerned citizen. Yeah, how to bring nature back to nature.
Yes, that's right. What part do we play as humans to speed that up? Because my assumption is if you leave it alone, it might just fix itself. Yeah. But maybe it's a speed thing.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I can talk to that one very briefly. I mean, rewilding in different places means different things to different people. So take my original British heritage, I suppose. Rewilding in the UK is easy. You just take animals off or don't grow wheat anymore, and nature magically starts to return, and you get nettles and brambles and all that kind of stuff. If you do that in this country, you get a series of European weed species returning, first of all, and they are not well set up for this climate, and so they dry off in the first summer and then become a fire risk, and you risk alienating all the people around you. So the transition for rewilding here requires much more hand-holding in our landscape type with our climate than it does in, say, a European setting. To give you an idea of, we're running out of time, frankly, to restore habitat and to get climate change under control. So I think that's the reason we have to intervene more. But to give you an idea of the kind of success rate, we have 23 mature pink gums on the site that collectively produce millions of seeds, and I've never seen a single sapling appear through the weed infestation from all of the seeds being dropped by those trees. And yet I took one branch of one tree, of which that tree had about 40 or 50 branches laden with seed, and I grew 2,000 pink gums in the nursery, which I've then planted on the property. So you are increasing what nature can do by giving it a kickstart by quite literally millions of percent, and that's really why we do it. In terms of schools, just quickly, I think really the tree planting program and growing the species, that if we could collectively get schools together to see who would grow what, we could actually rebuild habitat really effectively, because we tend to call habitats, pink gum habitat or red gum habitat, but actually there are 100 other species, many of which are important for birds and insects that are within that kind of habitat. We just call them that name because the trees are the kind of the climax vegetation type. But we need help. We need really schools growing these things in their nurseries, and you've got all the learnings associated with doing that, not just to do with the growing of the species, but also understanding what it means to be part of the solution to a problem, giving you the confidence that you can take something on and make a difference. There are so many learnings that can arise from it.
And with about 250 high schools in South Australia, if you're talking about 100 species, you could have a couple of schools for each one. I mean, I think that's a really interesting idea that's come out of today's
It
conversation.
is. We've lost 336,000 hectares of forest in South Australia between 2001 and 2021, and we are the best performing state in this country. Something has to change, very evidently.
PPPs, have you got anything, public-private partnerships?
I'll give an example. I live in the Unley Council area. They're going to run out of planting all the bits they can be responsible for in 6 years' time. And yet they have a carbon target and a biodiversity target that's far greater than what they can achieve on their land, at which point they need private individuals to step up to make a difference. And that is a metaphor for the problem writ large. If we're not going to achieve this just on public land, we need individuals to make their effort and make their contribution. Many people want to, just don't know what to do. It's a case of, like you say, public-private partnerships, I think, have got a lot of potential.
Now, Tiana, you're welcome to add anything to what Tim has said, but the art and music question, I thought you might have views on as well.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to add on the Public-Private Land Nature Foundation do really incredible work in that space, so you can have a look at the incredible work that they do. I was really excited to learn about what they've been up to recently. In terms of art and the environment, I think it's a really incredible way to do storytelling. We know that we just had, what's the lights that we have here? Illuminate. So incredible ways to be able to bring that connection in a way that's interesting and exciting. And I think Eden is still on, which is really vibrant, nature-based lights and shows, which is really beautiful. I've just gotten back from East Arnhem Land in Golcola, and at Cape Arnhem, the Diramu Ranger Group just found 2,500 ghost nets that had swept in from a current coming from Indonesia and got caught on the East Arnhem Cape. So they picked these up, they're so heavy, with a crane and moved them in for Garma, for the festival that's on this weekend. It's Australia's largest First Nations festival. And what they're doing with all these ghost nets is turning them into a big shade. So they've completely untangled them, rolled them back up in a beautiful way and made shade out of them. So it's a great way there's a repurposing of these terrible nets that absolutely degrade our environment, but also a connection to understanding the enormity of the issue, because there's these, thousands of kilograms of ghost nets now hanging up to provide that shade, and you can see the impact of it. We have learnt in doing that art piece, though, that when we hung them up, all of these little pieces of plastic are dropping off of the rope and degrading the environment, so we actually have to take them down because we don't want them to seep into the earth. But there's really fantastic ways of portraying that, and ghost nets, there's been lots of art done with First Nations artists making them into whales and different animals and showing that sort of area. In Yirrkala and in Yirrawi, they recently made some marine animals out of marine plastics and put them together in schools. And we know that all of our marine species now, and all human beings in our reproductive systems and a lot in our guts and feces, we find microplastics now. So that's a really great way of being able to share that information and talk about the seriousness of the issue that we're in. In terms of nature-based solutions, First Nations custodianship and care for country has been really important in bringing nature back, and something that we used to do really well was manage country in a hands-on approach. So when I go out with my dad on country, out through Larrakia country, he lives up in Darwin, we pick up and remove large amounts of leaf litter and branches that have dropped and fallen because no one manages country in that way as regularly as we used to, and take it away from the root systems of the trees. And then we do cool burns, so light fires, and move the leaf litter around to be able to allow that space back in the ecosystem, getting rid of that old burning, the really flammable stuff that dries out over the summer, to get rid of that so that we can regenerate new perennial grasses and things to come through. It also makes it easier for us to hunt because we can see the animals that are on the land rather than being in grass that is this tall. So that management of country is really important, and there's a really big need to pay First Nations people for their knowledge and time to manage country in a hands-on approach rather than just say in Arnhem, where I was recently, they're getting so much rubbish and litter coming in on their shorelines at the moment, and they've got all of these people who are trained rangers, and what they do for a lot of their time is just pick up waste that's been washed in from other countries coming in on their shoreline. So they've been scanning barcodes and tracking where the plastic comes from, but what they really need to be doing is making sea country management plans, rehabilitating old mining sites that are on country, and doing that proper JAMA or work that actually nurtures and heals country in that way. Was there another question?
I don't think so. Well, there might have been, but no, I think all four have been answered. Cool. And we are now reaching the point, because I'm conscious we start on time, we finish on time. Any good conversation, I think, always leaves people wanting more. And I suspect today has left people wanting more. But for us to be able to finish on time, I'm going to hand back to Hugh Borroman as Official Secretary to thank you all formally and to say one or two other things. Hugh.
Thank you, Your Excellency. That was the last of the winter conversations for this year, but from next month, on the first Friday of each month, the grounds of Government House are open at lunchtime, so please come along, bring a picnic. We provide entertainment from local bands, so you're very welcome to come to that. Another date to mark in your diaries is our next open day, which is Sunday the 13th of October, when the entire house and grounds will be open for the full day. And more information on these events will be available soon on the Government House website. In closing, can I please ask you to join me in thanking Her Excellency and our participants for a splendid final winter conversation. Thank you very much.